Obviously, there is a lot going on. Before I came up, I was checking my news feed from CNBC, our internal feed, and it does appear that as much as there was some optimism over the last couple of days about negotiations, House Speaker Boehner has pulled out rather abruptly. Dow futures are down about 300 points this evening, so it may be a very rocky day tomorrow. So actually, that's not at all true. I'm just playing with you and want to see if you're paying attention. So for those of you with pacemakers, I apologize. You bought it for a minute, though, didn't you? Yeah. Works every time, by the way. I do this every speech, and everybody gasps. I love it. I have had as Mark said, it's been associated with CNBC now for 22 years, and before that, I was with Financial News Network out in Los Angeles, which was the first all-day business television network in the country. Started there quite by accident. I was a film major at Cal State Northridge in Southern California. When I graduated, neither Steven Spielberg nor George Lucas bothered to call, and so I had a problem with gainful employment. Fortunately, a friend of mine from high school, Casey Wyan, who's still a reporter for CNN, was working at Financial News Network, something I'd never heard of. He'd gone from journalism school at USC over to FNN, and I called him and asked him if they had any openings, and he got me a job as an entry-level production assistant in June of 1984, about a week out of college. And so I went over there having absolutely no familiarity with business or news, for that matter. Worked there for about 4 months, was summarily dismissed 4 months after I got there. My executive producer walked over to me and said, and I was making $50 a day, no benefits at the time. I was just a freelance production assistant. And the gentleman came over to me and said, remember when I told you I needed you next week? I don't need you next week. And so I went back to the vitamin store where I worked in college, looked around for gainful employment. 4 months after that, because FNN went through a massive cutback the week after I was laid off and whacked 90% of the editorial staff, leaving my friend Casey as a producer, Bill Griffith and Sue Verrera, who you know from CNBC, both of whom remained as our full-time anchors, ad-libbing 8 hours of live business news television a day between them. And that was where we left off when I departed the firm. They had a couple of contributors. My friend Casey, as I said, stayed as a producer. 4 months later, he calls me up, asked me if I wanted his job as a producer, which I took immediately, and not having found anything on the entertainment side of the business. And 3 months after that, Bill and Sue, who had been sharing 8 hours, again, of live television every day between them, called in sick on the same day. And an enlightened young producer there gave me my first chance to go on air and do a couple of reports. The fact that I happen to have been that producer is probably immaterial for the purposes of this conversation, but it was a very thinly populated operation. I was the only person in the room. And in May of 1985, I got on the air. And by September, I was a full-time anchor with very little knowledge of the anchoring process and no knowledge of markets or economics. And as you can see from today's television, not much has changed when it comes to people who are on TV. But in truth, it was an accidental career. I never intended to be in financial news by any stretch of the imagination. Things happened the way they happened, and as people say, I was in the right place at the right time and caught the growth curve that started with Financial News Network many years ago and ultimately morphed into CNBC. We merged in 1991. And it's been an extraordinary ride. I mean, I have seen every major financial crisis since the mid-1980s. I've covered events that I never expected to cover, from 9/11 to G8 meetings outside the country to a whole host of other events, the World Economic Forum and what have you.